Can you just feel that as if your soul was singing that to you? That the day you were born, the universe sang those songs, that song to you, those words to you, that you are so beautiful. I think that song is a powerful song in those times and places in our lives when we say, why me? Or not me? Or fix me? Can you relate the why me, the not me, I can't do this, I'm not ready, or the fix me? That what is really being said and the opportunity in the face of all of those things is use me. In the midst of my why me, my not me, and my fix me is still a powerful use me. Oprah Winfrey says that her morning prayer every morning, 2 words, use me. What a powerful way to be of use. But if we're focusing on the parts of us that are flawed or not working properly, it's hard to easily gauge into that use me. But there's a story that illustrates that we truly are all being used and can be of use, and sometimes even when we don't think it. There's a story about a chemical plant that caught on fire. And inside this very large plant was a secret award-winning formula. The owner of the company stood outside as he watched this little small fire begin to engulf his building, and he was about to lose everything he had worked for in his life. So the fire departments had been called, and as they came in, they couldn't get too close to the building because the fire was so hot. And he said, well, I'll give $50,000 to any fire department that will get close enough to put out this fire. No one seemed to be able to get close enough. More and more fire trucks came in. He said, I'll give $100,000. Finally, he said, I'll give $250,000 to any fire department that can get in and put out this fire. And a neighboring fire truck, an old truck, came in, passed everybody, passed him, drove into the edges of the fire. A bunch of elderly seniors got out and started working with what they had, and they put that fire out. And as the fire was out, the man went over and immediately, on the spot, wrote the check. He was good for his word, $250,000. And someone said, how did you do that? And what are you going to do with that money? And the driver of the fire truck said, I don't know, but the first thing we're going to do is buy some new brakes. We darn near killed ourselves. Even though they weren't expecting to go that far in. Have you ever found yourself a little further in than you were expecting to go? And you're like, but that you can truly be of service. It's about being useful. That even those things that are not quite working right, or in the places of our mistakes and our mishaps, there's always good to be found. All of those things that happen, we can't say are good, but even in the worst of circumstances, peace may be found, forgiveness may be found, something may be found, that even in the hardest places and in the midst of our flaws and our imperfections, goodness can be found. But how many of you feel the pressure to be perfect? In a recent survey among young teenagers, 81% said they felt the pressure to be perfect. 81% of young teenagers said they felt the pressure to be perfect. And they described saying things that felt like they didn't measure up. How many of you carry a measuring stick in your head somewhere, and that we're always in some area, there's always some place that we feel like that we're not measuring up? And I think our entire society places a lot of emphasis on better and youthfulness and perfection and never letting things change, which is really not truth, because truth is always changing. Life is always growing, and there are different seasons, but we can't say that only this isolated picture or circumstance is perfect. Dr. Brené Brown writes in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, every day we face a barrage of images and messages from society and the media, and I may add, and even the religions, who tell us who and what and how we should be. We are led to believe that if we could only look perfect and lead perfect lives, we'd no longer feel inadequate. So most of us perform, please, protect, perfect, or pretend, and all the while thinking, what if I can't keep all these balls in the air? What will people think if I can't measure up? When can I stop proving myself and be my real self? What am I doing wrong? How many of you can relate to that? To feel that we need to show up. It's kind of interesting. When I was meditating this morning, and the image that came to me is that I was thinking about we're called to let our light shine. And as I was meditating on this light, I saw a picture of like a man with a comb on over. You know, we that truly is bald. And we know there's nothing going on up here, but there's a little bit going on back here. And so there's this attempt to, but everybody looking thinks, why are you doing that? We know there's nothing under there. Just and that we feel like saying, just push it back and be bald and be proud, just own it. And maybe I'm judging, thinking, that they shouldn't be that way. But there are times in my life that while I may not have a comb over, I am trying to hide something. And I'm spending so much time and energy keeping up this that I think that perhaps is what Jesus meant when he said, let your light shine. Don't put a bushel over it. Don't comb over and put all the, don't put the energy in the comb over or in the trying to perfect or protect or pretend, because that's fortifying an image. It's trying to save face. It's trying to create an image because we're afraid of being judged. We're afraid that if we show our baldness, our vulnerability, our imperfections, that we'll be judged as less than. And we all know that the truth of the matter is the greatest judge comes from where? Right here. That if we can make peace and accept our own baldness, our vulnerability, our insecurities, and what we may call inadequacies, that if we make peace, not giving up, not as a way out, not saying, oh, well, I can't change it and not trying. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about those things that maybe we can't change, those things that we're in the process of learning to change, but allowing that to keep us locked behind that those things, allowing them to become a barrier rather than an opening for our own soul's growth. And so today, I want to introduce you to a term that may be new for you, that's from a Japanese Zen concept. It's found in many spiritual traditions, but it's a way of looking at this, of how to realize that within life, there are things that are incomplete. There are things that we may say are imperfect, and that in the midst of those things, there is still beauty, there is still perfection, that life has both of those things. The term is called Wabi-Sabi. Would you give me the first? How many of you have ever heard of Wabi-Sabi? Wow, quite a few of you. So Wabi-Sabi is an untranslatable Japanese word that is to be understood as a way of living that focuses on finding beauty and purpose within the imperfections of life. Wabi-Sabi says that life has within it things that are imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. But if we are always trying to hide those, to fix those, then we're missing the whole picture, and perhaps we're missing a blessing. That life is about accepting peacefully the natural cycle and changing nature of growth and decay. Wabi-Sabi says that beauty and purpose are found in things that are weathered, asymmetrical, incomplete, imperfect, and impermanent. Can you think of anything in your own life that's weathered, asymmetrical, incomplete, imperfect, or impermanent? I like what this lady said. As I age, my body is becoming all of the above. And therefore, Wabi-Sabi has become my new chemo-sabi. Chemo-sabi means faithful friend. I like that. Wabi-Sabi has become my new chemo-sabi. I'm learning to see myself as a work of art. I think I would say a work of heart. That not in spite of my flaws, but because of them. As Allison Brilliant said, I may not be perfect, but parts of me are excellent. Now, in the spirit of Wabi-Sabi, I tell myself, I may not be perfect, but my imperfections are what make me one of a kind, real, beautiful, and with some useful purpose still to serve. To me, that is the most important thing, with some useful purpose still to serve. Krishnamurti said that our souls are from the same paper, but what makes us useful and unique are the cracks and creases formed in the paper from all the folding and unfolding of our life experiences. That to me feels so true, that I think what Wabi-Sabi teaches us that how to be mindful of the ego. The ego is a very normal and useful part of who we are. The ego, the persona, the mask is how we relate and see the world. But we can confuse ourselves with our image, that we have experiences, but we don't have to be defined by those experiences. We have experiences, but we are not those experiences. So the ego, ego, today I focus on SGO, that what's happening is a spiritual growth opportunity. That when I find myself getting frustrated and wanting to hide and wanting those flaws and imperfections to go away, or I'm not going to come out and play, so to speak, I remember it's an SGO. It's a spiritual growth opportunity, that every day of life is such. And so when we look at this, I go back to the why me, the fix me, and the not me. Because understanding the way of being, Wabi-Sabi, that life is about embracing, again, not in making it an excuse, but embracing the weathering of life, the brokenness, the hard places, those places that we may rather hide, embracing them and actually allowing them to further our spiritual growth opportunity and to actually be cracks, so to speak, that allow the light to shine through. And so the first thing I think that we can use to look at this is, why me? All of us at some time in our life, on either a small scale or a large scale, have said, why me? You may know of someone very close to you right now that is struggling, is sort of almost in their own gridlock, crippled under the why me. There's a scripture that is found in the Gospel of John, chapter 9, where people around Jesus were asking this, why do things like this happen? They said, walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, causing him to be blind? Now take that in a minute. They see a blind person and they say, Rabbi, why did this happen? What's wrong? Who made the mistake? Who sinned, the man or his parents? That also tells us they believed in the law of karma, that reaping what you sow, that why was this man blind? Did he do something in his life, or was he reaping something that his parents had done? And I love the answer. Jesus said, you are asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause-effect here. Look instead for what God can do. Another scripture translates it, this happens so that the work of God may be displayed in his life. I love that. You're asking the wrong questions, that the why me, when we find ourselves getting stuck, to turn it around and to say, what can be born out of this? What can be displayed in my life because of this? Perhaps I will find more humility, more compassion. Perhaps I will find something an inner reserve or resource that I did not know was there. You know, if you were going to counseling for a broken heart, would you want to go to someone that had never had a broken heart? No. You'd want to go to someone that had had their heart deeply broken and had been opened through that and had come out somehow a more humble, bright person whose light could even shine greater in the midst and through the brokenness. And so when we realize that, that's Wabi-Sabi, and that when we ask ourselves, why me, is to understand that perhaps we need to frame that and to say, what can God do in my life? What can this divine light do in my life? The reading that we had this morning that Charlie provided comes from the book Kitchen Table Wisdom. It's one of my favorite books by Dr. Rachel Naomi Reman. She herself is a doctor that has lived with Crohn's disease probably for over 50 or 60 years now. She knows what it is to be what some people call the wounded healer, a person who has lived with her own pain. She has lived with her own labels of being sick, and yet is an incredible writer and an incredible healer. Her idea of healing is not that it's about trying to fix something, but it's about having something revealed, being able to see something. She tells a story. She said, one of the angriest people I ever worked with was a young man with bone cancer of the right leg. He had been a high school and college athlete, and until the time of his diagnosis, life had been great for him. He had had lots of beautiful girlfriends, fast cars, personal recognition, and yet 2 weeks after his diagnosis, they removed his right leg above the knee. The surgery which saved his life also ended his life as he knew it. Can you realize that young man had every right to say, "Why me?" And we can get stuck and lost in that and let us define us, or we can say, perhaps that's not a useful question to ask anymore. The question at this point is, use me. How can I be of service? She said he refused to return to school. He began drinking heavily. He started using drugs. He alienated all of his former friends. He started having car accidents. After a couple of car accidents, finally one of his former coaches brought him in to see this doctor, Dr. Rachel, to see if she could help. And she said that he was filled with a sense of injustice and self-pity and hated all well people. In our second meeting, hoping to encourage him to show his feelings about himself, I gave him a drawing pad and asked him to draw a picture of his body. He drew a crude sketch of a vase, just as an outline. And running through the center of it, he drew a deep, dark crack. He went over and over the crack with a black crayon, gritting his teeth and ripping the paper. He had tears in his eyes. They were tears of rage. It seemed to me that the drawing was a powerful statement of his pain and his loss. It was clear that his broken vase would never hold water. It would never function as a vase again, and it hurt to watch. When he left that day, he left the picture on her desk, and she said it seemed too valuable to throw away, and so she kept it. Over the months, his anger began to subside a little bit, and he started bringing in paper clippings to Dr. Riemann and would say, look at this motorcycle accident, this young man lost his leg. Look at this car accident, this young woman lost her leg. And for a while, he was still engaged in the why did this happen? But the doctor said, what would happen if you went to the hospital and visited them? At first, he said he would never do it, but over time, someone in the paper caught his attention. He went to the hospital. He visited with them. And somehow he was able to relate to them. When they saw his prosthetic leg and that he could get around, it gave them hope. Little by little, the doctors began to invite him in. He discovered he had a real knack for working with people. He had a real sense of humor. One day, a young woman had been in, and she had breast cancer and had to have both breasts removed, a young woman. He went into her room and tried to cheer her up, and she was so despondent she wouldn't even turn around. And he said, well, I'll dance for you. And he started dancing until his leg fell off. And then she heard him flopping around and finally turned around, and she said, mister, if you can dance, I can sing. Well, they hit it off. They became each other's best friend. She encouraged him to go back to school. Long story short, they got married. Sometime later, he came back. It says, in our final meeting, I opened up his chart and found the picture of the broken vase that he had drawn 2 years before. Unfolding it, I asked him if he remembered the drawing he had made of his body. He took it in his hands and looked at it for some time, and he said, it's really not yet finished. Surprised, he extended my basket of crayons toward him, and taking a yellow crayon, he began to draw lines radiating from the crack. In the vase, to the very edges of the paper, thick yellow lines. I watched, puzzled, as he was smiling. Finally, he put his finger on the crack, looked at me, and softly said, this is where the light comes through. What a powerful realization and shift from why me to use me. Dr. Riemann said, suffering shapes the life force, sometimes into anger, sometimes into blame and self-pity. But eventually our suffering, our failures, our cracks may show us the true freedom of life, which is loving, being loved, and serving life. It reminds me of the Gospel of Paul. Paul, there's a lot written about Paul. He was very zealous, as the scriptures say. He wanted to go out and kill all the people who weren't Jewish like he was, all of the people of the way, what we may call Christians today. He was blinded by a light. He was stopped. He had a great transformation in his life. Even after all of that, he said he had what was called a thorn in the flesh. Now, we don't know what that was, but we know a thorn in the flesh would be a source of pain. It would hurt. There was something that was a constant hurt in his life that he wanted to go away. And he said, I begged God to remove it. 3 times I did that. And then God spoke to me saying, my grace is enough. It's all you need. My strength comes into its own in your weakness. Once I heard that, I was glad to let it happen. I quit focusing on the limitation and began appreciating the gift. It was a case of the strength of Christ in me moving on my weakness. Now I take limitations in stride and with good cheer. These limitations that used to cut me down to size, I just let the higher self, the Christ within me, take over. And so the weaker I get, the stronger I become. Bernard Branch said, the art of living lies less in eliminating our troubles and more in growing in them. You see, I think sometimes people, they see God in a very, what we would call anthropomorphic way. If you see God as this big personality and you're a puppet, then you can get stuck asking why. Why does this happen to me? But when we begin to realize that God perhaps is, I like to refer to it as from our mightymost self to our innermost self, that we're connected to this life force and it's not doing anything to us. Life operates through us. And it's not as if someone or something up there has cursed us or said, you go through this and you go through that. Life happens, Wabi-Sabi. All things will decay and die. Imperfections and incompleteness is a part of life, but learning to grow spiritually through those. Would you give me that song, Richard? The last story that really speaks to me, I'll begin by a quote that comes from a song by Leonard Cohen when he says, ring the bell that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That why me or not me, when we feel those places in our life, that it's an opportunity truly to say, use me. Why me, not me, fix me, use me. Listen to this story. In India, many years ago, an elderly water bearer had 2 large pots. Each hung on one end of a pole, which the water bearer carried on her neck. One of the pots had a crack in it, but the other pot was perfect. The perfect pot always delivered a pot full of water to the end of the long walk from the stream to the master's house. The cracked pot, well, it arrived half full. For 2 years, this went on daily with the water bearer delivering 1.5 pots of water to the master's house. Of course, the perfect pot was super proud of its accomplishment, thinking it was perfectly fulfilling for the purpose it was made. After 2 years of what had been perceived as a bitter failure, the cracked pot spoke to the water bearer one day by the stream and said, I am so ashamed of myself. I want to apologize to you. Why? Asked the water bearer. What are you ashamed of? I have been able for these past 2 years to deliver only half my load because this crack in my side causes me to leak out all the way to the master's house. Because of my flaws, you have to do all this work and you don't even get full value for your efforts. The water bearer felt the sadness of the old cracked pot, and in his compassion he said, as we return to the master's house, I want you to notice the beautiful flowers along the path. Indeed, as they went up the hill, the old cracked pot looked and noticed the sun warming the beautiful wildflowers on the side of the path, and this cheered the old pot some. But at the end of the trail, it still felt bad because it again had leaked out half of its load. And so it apologized to the bearer once again for its failure. The bearer said to the pot, "Did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the path, not on the other pot's side? That's because I have always known about your flaw, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on your side of the path only, and every day when we walk back to the stream, you have watered them. For 2 years, I've been able to pick and enjoy these beautiful flowers to decorate on the Master's table. Without you being just the way you are, he would not have had these to grace the entire house." Each of us are cracked pots. We have our unique flaws. But it's the cracks and the flaws that make our lives together so interesting and rewarding. In God's great economy, there's nothing to waste. And the writer says there is an Indian proverb that says, "Blessed are the cracks, for through them the light shines through." This week, each of us, may we cultivate eyes of Wabi-Sabi, realizing that things will weather, things will wear, things will be imperfect in our life as well. And find some pride in being an old cracked pot. And say, "Use me." I'd like to ask you to join me in this song that many of you will know that says, "How could anyone ever tell you you are anything less than beautiful?" How can anyone ever tell you you are anything less than beautiful? How can anyone ever tell you you are less than whole? How can anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. Now you've got it. Sing it out. How could anyone